Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome to Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on. And as you may have heard from my little friend here, today we are looking at a Jaeger-LeCoultre vintage Memovox co-signed by the retailer Turler, reference E855 with the caliber K825 automatic bumper Memovox movement. This watch dates from the early 1960s, and it represents one of the great Jaeger-LeCoultre classics in its historic 20th century catalog. Now, the original alarm watch was in fact the Vulcain Cricket of 1947, but hot on its heels and using a completely different alarm system, Jaeger-LeCoultre in 1950 launched the Memovox, and this, not the Cricket, was to become the enduring and iconic alarm wristwatch of the 20th century. It's also a signature of the Jaeger-LeCoultre manufacturer, and when you consider that JLC is known for everything from grand complications to ultra-thin movements for Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron, you realize that for the Memovox to stand as one of the all-time greats in that kind of catalog, it really must be something special. And this Memovox is. Now, the important thing about this watch is that although it was built in the early 1960s, it incorporates a lot of modern conveniences. It is an automatic, albeit a bumper automatic, so you get that charming sense of reversing momentum inside the case as the bumper winder jumps back and forth against its springs. But you get that automatic winding, you get a date, you get an alarm, which is really the ultimate complication, because when don't you need a reminder? And on top of that, at 37 millimeters, this 18 karat gold Memovox wears beautifully on the wrist. It's actually a little bit bigger than the comparatively recent Breguet Marine that I just reviewed recently. And at 37 millimeters, with beautiful vintage charm, including the sort of light bending, light distorting quality that you get from a domed plexiglass, it's really the best of a couple of different worlds. You get that JLC heritage, you get the Memovox heritage, the convenience of an alarm watch, and a vintage watch that wears quite contemporary. It's got nice span to its lugs with just a little bit of taper to pare down the mass and add some sleekness to the case. A gorgeous round watch. JLC really put it all together with this example, and I feel one of the real highlights of this watch is that it's as substantial as it looks, because this is a Jaeger-LeCoultre signed watch. It's signed on the dial, on the case, and on the movement. And let me tell you why that's special, because there were two different types of JLC built during this time period, the mid-century. From the 1930s to the 1980s, all Jaeger-LeCoultres sold in the United States were labeled as LeCoultre, and because of U.S. import tariffs at the time, and it wasn't a very expensive watch to begin with, so there wasn't a lot of price flexibility for the customer who bought these stateside, so they were imported as knockdown kits with dials and movements, and then the cases were constructed around the movements and they were timed in the U.S. Now, the consequence of that is that they were signed LeCoultre because the LeCoultre brand name was used in the United States and only Jaeger-LeCoultre was used overseas. So in addition to not being, in the view of some, full-fledged Jaeger-LeCoultres, their cases were made in the U.S., and here's the real distinction. The U.S. standard for a solid gold watch, and this is the real qualitative and substantive distinction, the U.S. standard for a solid gold watch was 14 carats. So with 18 karat being the standard for a European manufactured Jaeger-LeCoultre signed watch, that's what you get right here. That's 75% gold. It's a much higher purity. It's a much more substantial gold timepiece. So when you're looking at a gold JLC signed mid-century watch like this Memovox, you're looking at a more substantial amount of gold than you would get in the contemporary equivalent United States built model. Mechanically they're the same, but in terms of the quality of the case you're getting, hands down, if you're buying a gold case, you're getting a higher degree of purity in the European model. Now, there's a lot more going on here. In addition to the fact that it wears quite flat on my wrist, let me just recap. My wrist is 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters. This watch, because it has so much vintage charm, would look, well, even on a greatly, just a massive wrist. If you got a tree trunk wrist, no one is going to object to you wearing a 37 millimeter classy mid-century dress watch with an impeccable pedigree. And this watch really does have a dual pedigree. You see, co-signed dials, where you have the manufacturer at 12 and then you have the retailer at 6 o'clock, are highly prized because they give you part of the history of the watch, part of the provenance and the pedigree of the watch. And the real high-end retailers, the Tiffany's, the Cartier, Gobelin, Turler, they had a lot of value to the watch from a connoisseur's standpoint. Now, this one is signed Turler, which was a continental upscale watch, clock, and jewelry retailer during the mid-century, and it continues to be to this day. And the fact that you've got that Turler upscale heritage with the Jaeger-LeCoultre signature and manufacturer pedigree and the Memovox history and convenience really makes this a fantastic and fun piece to wear. I enjoy this tremendously, and although my JLC collection consists entirely of white metals, I gotta say I'm powerfully tempted by this one. I've also seen the movement of this watch when we took it in for inspection. The K825 in this watch is virtually untouched, in outstanding condition. It looks beautiful, and its 18,000 vibration per hour heartbeat sort of takes a stately sweep around the dial. It's got a cadence that's highly charismatic because it is a little bit bigger than most dress watches of the early 1960s. It also has a slightly longer seconds hand, which accentuates that nice, slow, traditional 2.5 hertz heartbeat. It's really a gorgeous thing to see, and it's actually got a little bit of the stutter step of the famed Polaris dive watch because it uses the same movement. And the convenience of having an alarm watch, especially a vintage one, is outstanding. You get the charm of an old watch, but the everyday utility of something that can remind you when you have to be at a meeting, when you have a doctor's appointment, when you have to pick the kids up from school. It's a fantastic total package to have a watch that has survived with the dial, the movement, and the case, all JLC signed, all in outstanding condition cosmetically and functionally, and to have a double signed dial with an upscale European retailer at 6 o'clock. This watch really is the total package, whether you're a vintage watch enthusiast, a complications enthusiast, or you're a JLC diehard like myself. Check out this vintage Jaeger-LeCoutlre Memovox in 18 karat yellow gold, 37 millimeters on our website, Watch You Want.